The cleaner heard the guard speaking Russian and warned the millionaire not to enter the meeting. And then something shocking happens. Subscribe to the channel and comment where you are watching from. The penetrating scent of disinfectant still lingered in the air of the 47th floor of the corporate tower, New York, when Rosa Johnson sensed that something was wrong. In the 15 years she had worked in the most luxurious commercial building in the city, she had never heard the security guards conversing in that language, Russian. The unmistakable accent echoed down the corridor as she organized her cleaning cart, and her heart began to race when she recognized some words she had learned from her Ukrainian grandmother, who had emigrated to the United States in the 1940s. "Neutralization of the target at 3:30 p.m., whispered one of the uniformed men, adjusting the communication device on his chest. Rosa pretended to be focused on the shelves of the cleaning supply closet, but her ears caught every word. She had the gift of being unnoticed, a skill developed over the years as a Mexican immigrant in New York, always observing, always cautious. The building where she worked was a symbol of American economic power. Its mirrored glass reflected the frenetic movement of Fifth Avenue, while inside, executives made decisions that moved millions of dollars. Rosa knew every corner of that place, from the Italian marble restrooms on the executive floors to the conference rooms with panoramic views of the city. She knew exactly which floor each company operated on, the executives' schedules, their habits, their quirks. Edward Johnson, the millionaire owner of the 47th floor, was known for his excessive paranoia and compulsive need for control. At 52, he had built an empire in the tech sector from scratch, but this meteoric rise had left deep marks on his personality. His impeccable appearance, perfectly styled grey hair, tailored suits from Savile Row, a Rolex watch that cost more than a middle-class apartment, hid an emotional vulnerability that few knew. Rosa had witnessed moments when Edward was alone in his office, gazing out at the city through the floor-to-ceiling windows, with a distant look that revealed the weight of the responsibilities he carried. She knew that behind the tough and authoritarian facade was a man who had suffered deep betrayals and had lost the ability to fully trust people. Without hesitation, Rosa abandoned her cart and ran toward the main office. Her rubber slippers made only a faint sound on the polished granite floor. The walls, lined with Brazilian mahogany and contemporary artworks, blurred past as she headed to the room where Edward was reviewing contracts for the most important negotiation of his career. "Mr. Edward," she whispered, lightly knocking on the ajar door. He looked up from the documents, and she noticed the dark circles under his eyes that betrayed sleepless nights. "I need to talk to you. It's urgent. Rosa, I have an important meeting in 15 minutes. Can you wait?" He replied, not fully lifting his head from the papers. "No, sir. The guards. They are speaking in Russian. They mentioned neutralizing a target at 3:30, she said quickly, nervously glancing at the door. Edward froze, his brown eyes locked onto hers with an intensity that Rosa knew well. It was the look he had when processing critical information for his business. Slowly, he rose from the Italian leather chair, his 5'10" frame casting a shadow over the rosewood table where million-dollar contracts were spread out. "Are you sure of what you heard?" he asked, his voice low but charged with tension. "I am, sir. My grandmother taught me some words in Russian when I was a child. They were talking about an operation, about neutralizing you," Rosa replied, wringing her hands nervously. Edward's paranoia, which many considered excessive, had saved his life and his business countless times over the years. He had survived sabotage attempts, industrial espionage, and even kidnapping. His distrust was not unfounded. It was the result of years navigating the turbulent waters of the American business world, where loyalties were bought and sold, and where competition sometimes crossed the line of legality. "Rosa, listen carefully," he said, walking to the window and observing the movement on the street. "I will cancel the meeting. I need you to keep pretending you saw nothing, but stay alert. If anything seems off, anything at all, you let me know immediately." "Of course, Mr. Edward. You have always been good to me and my family. When my son got sick, you paid for the treatment without me even asking." "I will never forget that," Rosa replied, her voice heavy with genuine emotion. Edward turned to her, and for the first time in months, Rosa saw something beyond the corporate mask on his face. It was gratitude, mixed with a vulnerability he rarely allowed to show. "Is your family doing well now?" he asked, a question that revealed the human side he hid from the corporate world. "Yes, sir. Thanks to you, my Peter graduated from college and got a good job. My Mary is finishing high school, and Joseph is still little, but he's growing strong," she smiled, thinking of the 3 children she supported with the salary from that job. Edward nodded, making a decision that would change the course of the next few months of his life. He picked up the phone and dialed his assistant. "Mark, cancel the 3:30 meeting. Tell them an emergency came up. And I want you here in my office in 5 minutes." His voice was firm, with the authoritative tone that everyone in his company knew well. As they waited, Rosa watched Edward pace back and forth in the office, his hands clasped behind his back. She knew he was processing information, devising strategies. This was how he always acted when facing crises. Meticulous, calculating, always 3 steps ahead of his adversaries. The office inn. It was a reflection of Edward's personality, elegant yet functional, luxurious but not ostentatious. The bookshelves contained everything from classics of American literature to technical management manuals. On the wall, diplomas and certifications shared space with photos of awards and corporate events. One personal photo was visible, a portrait of his daughter Emily, who was studying in London. "Rosa," Edward said, suddenly stopping in his tracks, "you didn't just save my life today. You may have saved my entire company. I will never forget this." Rosa felt a tightness in her chest. In that moment, she understood that she had become more than just an employee. She had become an ally in the silent war Edward was waging against enemies he did not yet fully know. The sound of the elevator echoed down the hallway, announcing the arrival of Mark. The next few minutes would determine how they would uncover who was behind the threat and why someone wanted to destroy Edward Johnson. The Tuesday afternoon in New York was just beginning, but for Edward and Rosa, that moment marked the start of a journey that would test not only their courage, but also the strength of human bonds that transcend social and economic differences. In the 8 months that followed that moment of revelation on the 47th floor, Edward Johnson's life transformed into a labyrinth of devastating discoveries. What initially seemed like a simple attempt at industrial espionage revealed itself to be a complex and meticulously planned conspiracy, orchestrated by the person he had trusted the most over 20 years of his life. Maria Johnson, his ex-wife, was not just the mother of his daughter Emily. She was the woman for whom he had left his first company to build something greater, the person who had stood by him during the tough years when they were still struggling to pay the bills of a 2-bedroom apartment in Brooklyn. Discovering that she had spent the last 2 years meticulously planning his financial ruin felt like a punch to the stomach that left him breathless for weeks. "How could you do this to me, Maria?" Edward shouted during one of their last phone conversations, his voice echoing through the empty office on a Friday night. 20 years, Maria. 20 years of our lives together. "You never saw me, Edward," she replied coldly from the other end of the line, her voice heavy with accumulated resentment. "It was always work, always business. Even when I was pregnant with Emily, you were in meetings. When she took her first steps, you were traveling to close a deal. You made your choice. Now I have mine." The call ended with the sound of the phone being abruptly hung up, leaving Edward alone with the echo of his own heavy breathing. He headed to the bar built into his office and poured a glass of 25-year-old Scotch whiskey, his hands trembling slightly as he held the crystal glass. Rosa, who had stayed late helping to organize the documents that would prove the conspiracy, watched Edward from a distance. She knew when it was best to give her boss space, but she also knew when her silent presence was a comfort. She continued folding towels and organizing cleaning supplies, her methodical actions providing a sense of normalcy amid the emotional chaos. "You know, Rosa," Edward said, breaking the silence, "I really thought I knew Maria. I thought that even with the divorce, there was still respect between us. There was still love in some way." "Dr. Edward," Rosa replied gently, pausing her activities, "sometimes the people we love the most are the ones who can hurt us the deepest. My grandmother used to say that betrayal always comes from those closest to the heart." The private investigation Edward hired revealed even deeper layers of betrayal. Robert Smith, his partner and best friend for 15 years, was not just a passive accomplice in Maria's plan. He had been the architect of several strategies to weaken the company from within, deliberately, sabotaging important contracts and leaking confidential information to competitors. 15 years, Robert. Edward confronted his former partner during a tense meeting in the main conference room. "You were at my table when Emily was born. You were her godfather at her baptism." Robert, a 48-year-old man with the appearance of a successful executive, slicked back black hair, Italian frame glasses, impeccably tailored navy suit, could not meet Edward's gaze. His hands nervously fiddled with a Mont Blanc pen as he tried to justify the unjustifiable. "Edward, you have to understand. Maria convinced me that you were losing focus. The company was stagnant. The employees were dissatisfied. She showed me numbers, reports." Robert stammered, his voice losing its usual confidence. "Fake reports, Robert. All fabricated by her." Edward slammed his fist on the glass table, making the water glasses tremble. "You helped me build this company from the ground up. How could you believe her instead of coming to talk to me?" The conference room, with its spectacular view of the New York skyline, had been the setting for countless important decisions over the years. Now its walls, lined with fine wood, bore witness to the destruction of a friendship that had seemed unshakable. The black leather chairs around the oval table seemed like silent judges observing the unfolding drama. Robert finally raised his eyes, and Edward saw something he did not expect: tears. "I fell in love with her, Edward. I know it was wrong. I know I should have talked to you, but she made me believe that you were already completely separated, that you were sabotaging your own business out of pride." "Did you start the affair before the divorce was finalized?" Edward asked, his voice low but filled with controlled fury. 6 months before, Robert admitted, lowering his head. "She said you hadn't spoken in a year, that the marriage had been dead for a long time." Edward felt as if the ground had disappeared beneath him. The chronology of betrayal began to make sense. The subtle changes in Maria's behavior over the last years of the marriage, Robert's frequent trips, the business decisions that seemed illogical at the time. Rosa, who had become a constant presence behind the scenes of the investigation, discovered through her informal network of employees that the operation was even more extensive. During her conversations with other cleaning women working in nearby buildings, she learned that Maria had systematically approached several key people in Edward's professional circle. "Doctor," Rosa said one morning, entering the office with a serious expression, "I spoke with Claire, who works in the building on 42nd Street. She told me that Mrs. Maria was seen several times having lunch with Dr. Henry Smith." Henry Smith was the attorney who had handled Edward's divorce, a respected professional with 45 years of impeccable career. The possibility that he was also involved in the conspiracy made Edward feel as if he were sinking in quicksand. "This can't be true," Edward murmured, running his hands through his hair. "Henry is like a father to me. He has known my family for decades." But the truth was even more bitter than Edward imagined. When confronted, Henry Smith admitted that he had forged some divorce documents. Legally, Edward and Maria were still married, which entitled her to half of all assets acquired in the last 3 years, exactly the period during which the company had experienced its greatest growth. "Henry, how could you do this to me?" Edward asked during a meeting in the attorney's office, an elegant room in downtown New York, decorated with antique furniture and shelves filled with legal codes. "Edward, my son," said Henry, a 70-year-old man with completely white hair and wrinkles that told decades of experience. "Maria showed me evidence that you were hiding assets. She convinced me that she was just protecting her rights as a wife." "What evidence?" Edward demanded, his patience wearing thin. "Photographs of you entering banks in tax havens, records of transfers to offshore accounts." Henry seemed to shrink in his chair as he spoke. "All false, Henry. All fabricated," Edward exploded. "You have known me for 25 years. You know I would never do anything illegal." The law office, with its rosewood furniture and walls lined with diplomas and certifications, had been a place of refuge and advice for Edward for years. Now, it felt like a torture chamber where yet another relationship of trust was unraveling before his eyes. Henry removed his glasses and nervously wiped the lenses. "She threatened me, Edward. Said she had evidence of my professional negligence in other cases. My reputation, my family. I couldn't take the risk." The discovery that even his attorney had been compromised left Edward in a state of paranoia that Rosa had never witnessed before. He began to question every employee, every business partner, every person who had access to the company's information. "Dr. Edward," Rosa said one afternoon, finding him sitting alone in the conference room, staring out the window with a vacant expression. "You can't let this destroy your faith in people. There are still loyal people around you." "How can I know, Rosa?" He replied without turning. "How can I trust anyone again when the people closest to me have betrayed me?" Rosa approached and for the first time in 15 years of work gently placed her hand on her boss's shoulder. "Because not everyone is here for money, Doctor. Some of us are here because you treated us like people, like family. And true family doesn't abandon family." In that moment, Edward realized that amidst all the betrayal and disappointment, he had found an unexpected ally, a simple woman who had dedicated 15 years of her life to keeping his world running, asking for nothing in return but a fair salary and respect. Rosa Johnson had learned since childhood, on the dusty streets of La Paz, that survival depended on observation. At 42, this skill had been refined to become almost an art. In New York, as a Bolivian immigrant working in the cleaning of one of the city's most important buildings, she had developed a unique ability to move among the powerful while remaining completely invisible to their eyes. "People like us are ghosts to them, honey," Rosa explained to her daughter Mary during a simple dinner of rice, beans, and fried egg in their 2-bedroom apartment in East Harlem. "They see our uniforms, our brooms, our carts, but they never see our faces. And sometimes that's our greatest strength." Mary, a 17-year-old with dreams of studying journalism at NYU, watched her mother with growing admiration. Rosa had raised 3 children alone after her husband died in a construction accident, keeping the family together with her willpower and 2 jobs, cleaning in the building in the morning and caring for the elderly at night. "Mom, but what exactly are you going to do to help Dr. Edward?" asked Peter, her 23-year-old eldest son, who had graduated as an electronics technician thanks to the financial support Edward had provided years earlier. Rosa smiled, her dark eyes shining with determination. "I will use our network, honey. The girls who work with me know everything that happens in this city. You would be surprised at what can be discovered just by paying attention. In the following days, Rosa discreetly mobilized a network of working women that extended throughout central New York. They were Filipinas caring for children in luxury apartments, Peruvians working in upscale restaurants, Brazilians cleaning law offices, and Haitians serving coffee in large corporations. They all shared a common trait. They were practically invisible to Claire, observed the people around her. "Emily," Rosa called her friend who worked in the building on Fifth Avenue, "I need you to keep an eye on Dr. Maria Johnson. She's blonde, tall, always wears expensive clothes. She's been frequenting the financial district a lot lately." Claire, a 50-year-old woman who had emigrated from Texas 2 decades earlier, didn't hesitate to help. "Of course, Rosa. You helped me when my grandson got sick. Now it's my turn. What do you want to know about her?" "I want to know who she meets, where she goes, what kind of conversations she has. But be careful, my dear. These people are dangerous, Rosa warned, her voice heavy with genuine concern. Rosa's informal operation quickly expanded. Through WhatsApp groups of housekeepers and cleaners, she started receiving valuable information about Maria's movements and her accomplices. The women communicated using simple codes: the blonde in high heels for Maria, the one with glasses for Robert, the old man with white hair for Attorney Henry. During the traditional Day of the Dead celebration, where miniature representations of wishes for the coming year are created, Rosa had a brilliant idea. Taking advantage of the festive decorations spread throughout the building as part of the multicultural celebrations promoted by management, she hid small recording devices among the colorful miniatures. "Dr. Edward," she said during a private conversation in the office, "I managed to get some small microphones from my nephew who works in electronics. I can place them in the right spots without anyone suspecting." Edward looked at Rosa with a mix of admiration and concern. "Rosa, this is very dangerous. If they find out, you could go to jail. I can't allow you to take such risks." "Doctor," Rosa replied firmly, adjusting her Navy uniform, "you gave me a chance when no one else would. When I came to the US, I didn't even speak English properly. You hired me anyway, taught me, respected me. When my Peter got sick and needed surgery, you paid for everything without me even asking. Now it's my turn to give back." Rosa knew exactly where to position the devices. During her 15 years in the building, she had mentally mapped every corner, every room, every point where important conversations took place. She knew the executive schedules when the rooms were empty and understood the movement patterns of every important person. The first major result came a week later. Mark, Edward's personal assistant, a 28-year-old with an impeccable appearance and an MBA from a prestigious university, was caught photographing confidential documents during lunch. "Dr. Edward," Rosa said, handing him a small recorder, "you need to listen to this. It's from your assistant." The recording revealed Mark talking on the phone. "Yes, I got the spreadsheets for the Atlantic project. I'll send them tonight. No, he doesn't suspect a thing. He thinks I'm the model employee. Is the payment going to be made as we agreed? I need to settle my debts with the loan sharks before they come after my family." Edward felt his stomach drop. Mark was not just an employee. He was someone he had invested in, mentored, and saw potential for great things in the company. Discovering that his trust had been betrayed by gambling debts was another stab in his already wounded ability to trust people. "Rosa, how did you get this?" Edward asked, his voice revealing emotional exhaustion. "Dr. Edward, people like me are trained to listen without being seen. It's a matter of survival," she replied simply. "And there's more. I got information about the executive secretary as well. Carmen, the 45-year-old executive secretary who had worked at the company for 8 years, had been one of Edward's most trusted employees. Always punctual, efficient, discreet. Discovering that she was also involved in the conspiracy was devastating. The recording of Carmen revealed a different but equally tragic story. "I can't do this anymore. My son has nothing to do with this. You promised you would stop threatening him if I cooperated. He's only 20, trying to build a life." "She's being blackmailed, Doctor," Rosa explained, seeing Edward's confused expression. "I've heard her crying in the bathroom several times. I think they threatened her son." Edward stood up and walked to the window, watching the intense movement on Fifth Avenue. The discovery that Carmen was not a willing traitor, but a victim, forced to cooperate under threats, added a new layer of complexity to the situation. "Rosa, I need you to be very careful," he said, turning to her. "If they find out you're helping us—" "Doctor, don't worry about me. I know how to take care of myself," Rosa interrupted. "But there's one thing you need to know. My nephew Charles. He works in this building too." Edward frowned. "Charles? I don't know any Charles who works here. He was hired 3 months ago as an IT technician for the building maintenance company. A handsome young man, 22 years old, very smart with computers," Rosa explained, a growing concern in her voice. "And what's the problem?" Edward asked, although he already suspected the answer. "I think he's being used unknowingly, Doctor. Last night he told me he's been installing some strange programs on the computers, but they said it's to improve security. He doesn't know, but I think they're viruses. Edward felt as if he were in a nightmare, where each discovery revealed that the betrayal extended even deeper into his life. Now even the nephew of the only person he could trust was being manipulated by the conspiracy. "Rosa, your nephew is in danger," Edward said gravely. "If they find out he's your relative, or if he discovers the truth about what he's doing, I know, Doctor. That's why I need to protect him without him knowing. He's a good boy, hard-working. He's paying for his engineering degree with this job. If he finds out he's being used to harm his family—" Rosa couldn't finish. The phrase, her aunt's and mother's concerns blending with her loyalty to Edward. At that moment, Edward fully understood the extent of the sacrifice that Rosa was making for him. She was not only risking her own job and security, she was putting her family's safety at risk, the future of an innocent nephew, all for loyalty to a boss who had always treated her with dignity. "Rosa," Edward said, his voice heavy with emotion, "I will never be able to repay what you are doing for me." "Doctor," she replied, adjusting the flowers from the Day of the Dead decoration on the table. "Family takes care of family, and you have always been family to us." The discovery of the true extent of the conspiracy hit brutally on Carnival Monday, when the sound of street parties still echoed through the avenues of New York. Edward was in his office, trying to process the latest revelations about the people he had trusted, when he received a call that would make his world crumble even further. "Mr. Johnson," said the cold voice of tax auditor John Parker on the other end of the line, "I need you to come to the IRS today. Serious irregularities have emerged in your tax returns for the last 3 years. Edward felt the blood run cold in his veins. "What kind of irregularities?" "My accountants are the best in New York. Everything is in strict order. We have evidence of tax evasion through offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands and undeclared transfers to tax havens. The fines and interest have already exceeded $50 million. Mr. Johnson, not to mention possible criminal sanctions." After hanging up the phone, Edward sat in silence for long minutes, trying to process the information. Rosa, who was organizing nearby files, immediately sensed that something was terribly wrong. The expression on her boss's face was that of someone who had just received a terminal diagnosis. "Dr. Edward, what happened?" she asked, approaching cautiously. "Rosa, they fabricated evidence of tax evasion. Documents so convincing that even my own accountants are starting to doubt my honesty," Edward said, running his hands through his hair in a gesture of total despair. The accounting firm Parker & Associates had managed Edward's finances for over a decade. Dr. Oswald Parker, the firm's chief accountant, was known for his meticulousness and unwavering ethics. When even he started to question the veracity of Edward's financial documents, the situation became desperate. "Edward, my friend," Dr. Oswald said during an emergency meeting in his office in Brooklyn, "these documents, they look authentic. Signatures, stamps, sequential numbering. Everything checks out. If they are forgeries, they are the best I've seen in 40 years of practice." The accounting office, with its shelves filled with tax books and old calculators, had always been a place of tranquility for Edward. Now the walls covered with certificates and diplomas seemed like silent witnesses to his growing professional destruction. "Oswald, you have known me for 12 years. You know I would never do anything illegal. These documents are elaborate fabrications, but they are lies," Edward insisted, his voice heavy with frustration. Dr. Oswald, a 60-year-old man with completely grey hair and gold-rimmed glasses, nervously flipped through the forged documents. "Edward, I want to believe you, I really do. But the IRS has copies of bank transfers, records of entries and exits from the country, even footage of you entering banks in the Cayman Islands." "Footage? What footage?" Edward asked incredulously. "Security camera footage showing you entering the First National Bank of Cayman on 3 different occasions last year," Dr. Oswald replied, sliding a folder with photographs across the table. Edward examined the images with growing horror. It was really him in the photographs, or at least someone who looked extraordinarily like him. The quality of the images was slightly grainy, but enough to convince any casual observer that it was Edward Johnson entering and exiting a bank in the Cayman Islands. "This is impossible," Edward murmured. "I have never been to the Cayman Islands in my life. Last year, I was here in New York on all those dates. Rosa can confirm she has records of all my appointments." At that moment, Edward understood that he was dealing with extremely sophisticated professionals. The operation against him was not just a domestic conspiracy orchestrated by a resentful ex-wife. It was an international industrial espionage operation. As Edward dealt with the fiscal crisis, Rosa continued her discreet surveillance. During her daily conversations with the network of domestic workers, she began to gather information about suspicious movements throughout the city. "Rosa," said Laura, a cleaner who worked at the Johnson & Smith law firm, "that old lawyer you asked me to watch. He's been very nervous lately. I heard him yelling on the phone about evidence that could destroy his career." "And what else did you hear, comadre?" Rosa asked during a nighttime phone conversation from her apartment in East Harlem. "He was talking about compromising photographs of someone in his family. He seemed very desperate, Rosa. He even cried during a call," Laura replied in a low voice. Rosa shared this information with Edward the next morning. The discovery that attorney Henry Johnson was also being blackmailed added a new perspective to the conspiracy. They were not just greedy collaborators. Many were victims coerced by specific threats. "Rosa, I need to understand who is really behind this," Edward said, pacing nervously around the office. "Maria may be smart, but she doesn't have the resources or knowledge to orchestrate something so sophisticated." The answer came from an unexpected source. Charles, Rosa's nephew who worked as an IT technician, had started to suspect the security programs he was installing. His background in computer engineering alerted him to the fact that the codes did not seem like legitimate security programs. "Aunt Rosa," Charles said during dinner at Rosa's house on Sunday, "I think I'm making something is wrong at work. The programs they had me install, they behave like viruses, not like security software." Rosa tried to stay calm, but her heart raced. "What do you mean, honey?" "They access personal files, copy passwords, transmit information to external servers." "This isn't protection, Aunt. This is espionage," Charles explained, his voice revealing growing concern. Peter, Rosa's eldest son, who had become quite close to his cousin Charles, leaned forward at the table. "Charles, have you told anyone at work?" "Not yet. I'm afraid of losing my job, but I'm also scared of being involved in something illegal," Charles admitted, nervously fiddling with the food on his plate. Rosa knew she needed to act quickly. If Charles were discovered as a source of information or refused to continue installing the viruses, he could be in real danger. At the same time, he was the key to understanding how the criminals were accessing Edward's company's systems. "Charles," Rosa said carefully, "can you show me these programs?" "Without touching anything, just so I can see?" "I can, Aunt." "But why do you want to see?" "You don't understand computers," Charles asked, intrigued. "Because," Rosa said, choosing her words carefully, "I think you might be being used to harm good people. And if that's true, we need to do something about it." The following Monday, Rosa discreetly took Charles to Edward's office after normal working hours. The presentation of the espionage programs to Edward confirmed her worst suspicions. The operation was much more sophisticated and dangerous than he had imagined. "These codes are military grade," Edward said, after examining the programs with Charles. "Whoever is behind this has access to government espionage technology." Charles looked from Rosa to Edward, beginning to understand the gravity of the situation. "Dr. Edward, I swear I didn't know I was harming your company. They told me it was to protect against hackers." "I know, Charles. You are a victim, just like all of us," Edward said gently. "But now that we know the truth, you can help us figure out who is really behind this." At that moment, They formed an unusual alliance: a millionaire businessman, a cleaning lady, and a young engineering student, united against an international conspiracy that threatened to destroy not only a corporate empire, but the lives of everyone involved. The battle was just beginning, but for the first time in months, Edward felt he wasn't fighting alone. He had true allies, people who cared about him not for what he owned, but for the kind of person he was. March arrived in New York, bringing with it the typical torrential rains of late winter, and with it a discovery that would make Edward question everything he thought he knew about his life. The criminal attorney he had hired to handle the tax evasion charges arrived at the office on a gray Tuesday morning, carrying a briefcase that would completely change the course of the investigation. "Edward," said Dr. Mark Anderson, a renowned 55-year-old criminal lawyer known for defending executives in complex cases, "we found something you need to see. Brace yourself, because this is going to hurt." Dr. Anderson, with his imposing posture and perfectly styled grey hair, had spent the last 3 weeks meticulously investigating Edward's divorce papers. His grave expression indicated that the news was not good. "Mrs. Mary forged the signatures on the divorce documents," Dr. Anderson said, placing the briefcase on Edward's desk. "Legally, you are still married. She's entitled to half of all the assets acquired in the last 3 years. Edward felt as if he had been punched in the stomach. "How is that possible?" "Henry Johnson personally handled the entire process." "That's exactly where the problem lies," Dr. Anderson replied, opening the briefcase and revealing documents with forensic handwriting analyses. "Dr. Henry was coerced into forging your signature on the official documents. His signatures are authentic, but yours and the witnesses are extremely sophisticated forgeries." Rosa, who had been quietly organizing the files nearby, watched the growing pallor on Edward's face. She had learned to read her boss's expressions over the years, and knew this was one of the worst pieces of news he had ever received. "Does this mean Mrs. Mary can legally claim half of the company?" Edward asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Not only can she, Edward, she has already filed a lawsuit claiming exactly that," Dr. Anderson confirmed. "And based on the forged tax evasion documents, she is arguing that you hid assets during the marriage, which would entitle her to an even greater settlement." The room fell into heavy silence, interrupted only by the sound of rain hitting the windows on the 47th floor. Edward stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the city of New York through the foggy glass. Down below, millions of people went about their normal lives, unaware of the drama unfolding hundreds of feet above their heads. "Dr. Anderson," Rosa said timidly, breaking the silence, "may I ask a question? How did Mrs. Mary manage to forge the signatures so well?" Dr. Anderson looked at Rosa with respect. Over the past few weeks, he had come to appreciate the cleaning lady's insightful observations. "Good question, Rosa. To forge signatures with this quality, she would need access to multiple samples of Edward's handwriting, as well as professional equipment." "She had access," Edward said grimly, still looking out the window. 20 years of marriage, thousands of documents signed at home, contracts I brought home to review. She had unlimited access to my signature." At that moment, Edward's phone rang. It was his daughter Emily, calling from London, where she was studying at the London School of Economics. Edward hesitated before answering, fearing that Mary had involved their daughter in the conspiracy. "Dad," the voice, Amanda, sounded tense and worried on the other end of the line. "There are some strange men following me here in London. Yesterday they were at the university library, and today I saw them at the cafe, where I always have lunch." Edward's blood ran cold. "Amanda, where are you now?" "I'm in my dorm room, but Dad, I'm scared. Yesterday one of them tried to talk to me on the subway. He asked about you, about the company." Amanda's voice trembled slightly. "Listen carefully, Amanda," Edward said, trying to keep his voice calm. "I want you to go immediately to the British Embassy. Don't leave your dorm room alone. Ask someone to accompany you. I'm going to call the university security." After hanging up, Edward turned to Dr. Mark Anderson and Rosa Johnson with an expression of fury that neither had seen before. "They involved my daughter. Until now, it was just business. But now they've involved Amanda. Dr. Mark immediately understood the gravity of the situation. Edward, this indicates that we are dealing with professionals of international caliber. Following a Brazilian student in London requires significant resources and international coordination. Rosa, who had become an expert at noticing details that others missed, asked a question that would completely change the perspective of the investigation. Dr. Edward, does Mrs. Mary have the financial resources to hire this kind of operation? Edward paused to think. During the marriage, Mary had worked as an interior designer with a clientele of upper-middle-class clients. After the divorce, she maintained a comfortable lifestyle, but nothing that indicated access to the millions of dollars necessary for such a sophisticated operation. Rosa is right, Dr. Mark said, flipping through his notes. An operation of this magnitude, professional-level document forgery, international espionage, tracking in London, bribing multiple professionals, would easily cost several $1 million. So who is funding this? Edward asked, beginning to understand that Mary was just a piece in a much larger game. The answer began to form when Charles, Rosa's nephew, arrived at the office that afternoon with information he had gathered about the external servers to which the viruses were transmitting data. Using his computer engineering skills, he had partially traced the destination of the stolen information. "Uncle Edward," Charles said. He had started calling Edward Uncle at Rosa's insistence. "I managed to trace some of the servers. They lead to a company called Baltic International Consulting, registered in Estonia." Dr. Mark raised an eyebrow. "Estonia? That's very specific. Why would an Estonian company be interested in a Brazilian tech company?" Edward began to connect the dots. His company had recently developed a revolutionary agricultural management software that was being licensed to several countries in Latin America. The software had the potential to transform agriculture on a continental scale. "The agrotech software," Edward murmured. "They want the source code of agrotech." "What is agrotech?" Rosa asked, always attentive to details that could be important. "It's an artificial intelligence system that optimizes crops, predicts harvests, manages water resources. It's potentially worth billions of dollars if applied on a global scale," Edward explained. "And we were planning to expand into Africa and Asia next year." Dr. Mark nodded gravely. "Now it makes sense. This is not a complicated divorce case, Edward. It's international corporate espionage. Mary is being used as a tool to access your company from within." At that moment, Rosa received a call on her cell phone. It was Claire, her friend, who worked in the Fifth Avenue building. The information she brought confirmed everyone's worst suspicions. "Rosa," Claire said, her voice agitated, "I just saw Mrs. Mary leaving a meeting with some men who didn't look Brazilian. They were speaking a strange language. It wasn't English or Spanish. Did you manage to see their faces?" Rosa asked. "I did. One was very tall, blonde, with a foreign accent when he spoke Portuguese. The other was shorter, had a scar on his chin. They handed a briefcase to Mrs. Mary." Rosa hung up and immediately shared the information with Edward and Dr. Mark. The description of the men, combined with the Estonian origin of the servers, painted a clear picture. Mary was being funded and directed by an international industrial espionage operation. "Edward," Dr. Mark said, "you are not just fighting against your ex-wife. You are fighting against an international organization that wants to steal your technology." Edward sat heavily in his black leather chair, the weight of the revelation pressing down on his shoulders. 20 years of marriage," he murmured. 20 years with a woman I loved, who I thought loved me, and she sold me to international criminals." Rosa approached, and once again gently placed her hand on her boss's shoulder. "Dr. Edward, you can't let them win. It's not just about you now. It's about Amanda. It's about all the employees of the company. It's about my family, too." Edward looked at Rosa and saw not just a loyal employee, but a woman who had become the most important ally in his life. At that moment, he made a decision that would define not only the future of his company, but also the kind of man he would choose to be in the face of adversity. "You're right," he said, rising with renewed determination. "We're not just going to defend ourselves. We're going to counterattack." The revelation that Mary was pregnant hit like an emotional earthquake on a rainy April afternoon. Edward received the news through a cold and calculated call from Robert, his former partner, who seemed to relish every word he spoke. "Edward, I thought you should know," Robert said with barely concealed satisfaction in his voice. "Mary is expecting a child of mine. 3 months along. Since you are still legally married, this significantly changes the financial situation." Edward felt as if the ground had disappeared beneath his feet. Not only had Mary betrayed him with his best friend, but now she was carrying Robert's child while still technically being his wife. The complexity, the legal situation was devastating, but the emotional pain was even worse. "Robert," Edward said, his voice controlled but filled with contained fury, "you destroyed a 15-year friendship for a woman you don't even really know. She's using you just like she used me." "At least she's pregnant with my child, not yours," Robert cruelly replied before hanging up. Rose, who was present during the call, watched as Edward collapsed into his executive chair. She had seen many expressions on her boss's face over the years: anger, frustration, determination, but she had never seen that particular mix of betrayal, pain, and emotional exhaustion. "Dr. Edward," she said gently, "do you want to be alone?" "No, Rose, please stay," Edward replied, running his hands over his face. "You're the only person I can still fully trust." During those same days, the company began to feel the devastating effects of the sabotage campaign. Important contracts were being cancelled due to rumors about financial issues. Boeing had suspended negotiations to license the tech agro software, citing concerns about the financial stability of the supplying company. Mark Oliver, the sales director and one of the company's longest-serving employees, entered Edward's office with a grim expression. At 45, Mark had helped build the company from its early contracts, and watching the empire they had erected crumble was devastating for all the loyal employees. "Edward," Mark said, heavily sitting in one of the leather chairs, "we lost the contract with Boeing today. They cited the IRS investigations as the reason for cancelling negotiations." "How much does that represent?" Edward asked, although he already knew the answer would be terrible. $42 million over the next 3 years, Mark replied. "If we keep losing contracts at this rate, we'll have to lay off half the staff by the end of the year." Rose watched the conversation in silence, but her mind was already working. During her conversations with the network of cleaning ladies, she had noticed a suspicious pattern. Several companies that had cancelled contracts with Edward had received visits from foreign consultants in the weeks leading up to the cancellations. "Dr. Edward," Rose interrupted, "can I ask a question? Did those companies that cancelled the contracts, did they give the same justification?" Mark looked at Rose with curiosity. Over the past few months, he had learned to respect the insightful observations of the cleaning lady. "Interesting question, Rose. Yes, they all mentioned the tax investigations, but now that you mention it, several also mentioned receiving confidential information about problems in the company." "What kind of information?" Edward asked, a suspicion growing in his mind. "Detailed reports on financial instability, management issues, technical problems with the tech agro software. Information that only someone from inside the company could have," Mark explained. Rose stood up and walked to the window, looking at the activity on Fifth Avenue. "Dr. Edward, I think they're not just stealing information from the company. They're spreading lies to destroy your reputation in the market." Rose's analysis was correct. Through her informal network of contacts, she had discovered that representatives from Atlantic International Consulting were systematically visiting Edward's key clients, presenting falsified evidence of problems in the company and offering alternative solutions for their technological needs. Charles, who had become a valuable ally in the investigation, brought even more disturbing information that afternoon. Using his ethical hacking skills under the careful supervision of Dr. Mark to ensure nothing illegal was done, he had managed to intercept some communications from the criminals. Uncle Edward, Charles said, connecting his laptop to the conference room's projection system. I intercepted some messages between the Atlantic servers and computers here in the US. What I found is alarming. The messages revealed that the operation against Edward was just phase one of a larger plan. Atlantic International Consulting planned to acquire Edward's company for a fraction of its real value after destroying its reputation and financial situation. The tech agro software would then be licensed exclusively to companies controlled by Atlantic in international markets. They plan to make billions of dollars with the technology you developed, Charles explained, pointing to codes on the screen. Maria and Robert will receive a small cut for their services rendered, but Atlantic will keep the majority of the profits. Edward felt a cold fury rising within him. It wasn't just about money or intellectual property. It was about years of hard work, innovation, and dedication being stolen by international criminals who had contributed nothing to the development of the technology. "Rose," Edward said, turning to his most trusted ally, "I need you to mobilize your entire network. I want to know every move Maria, Robert, the foreigners, and everyone involved makes." "I'm already doing that, Dr. Edward," Rose replied. "And I found something important." Laura, who works in Dr. Henry Johnson's office, overheard him talking about documents that could completely destroy the criminals if they were made public. Dr. Mark, who had arrived during the conversation, leaned forward with interest. "What kind of documents? Contracts, bank transfers, recordings of conversations?" "It seems Dr. Henry documented everything as a sort of life insurance," Rose explained. "The discovery that Henry Johnson had secretly documented the entire criminal operation offered the first real hope Edward had felt in months. If they could access those documents, they would have enough evidence not only to defend themselves, but to completely dismantle the criminal network. The problem, Dr. Mark said, is how to gain access to those documents without exposing Henry to retaliation." Rose smiled, an expression Edward had learned to recognize as the harbinger of a brilliant idea. "Dr. Mark, leave that to me. The cleaning ladies have access to all the offices in the city, and Henry Johnson seems to be looking for a way out of this situation." That night, Rose coordinated the most audacious operation of her life. Through Laura, she managed to arrange a meeting with Dr. Henry. In a discreet cafe in the city center, the attorney, who had visibly lost weight over the past few months due to stress, arrived at the meeting looking like a man desperate for redemption. "Rose," said Dr. Henry, his hands trembling slightly as he held the coffee cup, "they threatened my grandson, an 8-year-old boy. They said they would do something terrible to him if I didn't cooperate." "Dr. Henry," Rose replied gently, "you are a good person who has been forced to do bad things. But now we have a chance to put an end to this." Dr. Henry looked around the cafe, checking to see if they were being watched. "I documented everything, Rose. Every conversation, every transfer, every threat. I have enough evidence to put them all in prison for decades." "Then let's do it," Rose said with determination. "Let's end this story once and for all." At that moment, Dr. Henry made the decision that would change the course of the entire operation. He handed Rose a bank vault key and an address. "All the evidence is in this vault," he said. "Use it to take down these criminals. And Rose, tell Edward that I'm sorry. I'm so sorry for everything." Rose left the cafe knowing they finally had the necessary weapons, not just to defend themselves, but to counterattack with devastating force. The war was far from over, but for the first time, they had a real advantage in the fight. June arrived in New York with its chilly nights and traditional festivals. But for Edward Johnson, the summer festival season represented much more than folk celebrations. It was the perfect opportunity to execute the boldest plan of his life, a meticulously planned trap that would use his enemies' own arrogance against them. The St. John Festival at the company had become an annual tradition, bringing together employees, business partners, and investors for a celebration that honored both cultural roots and the year's business successes. This year, Edward decided that the event would be special for reasons only Rose, Dr. Mark, and Charles knew. "Dr. Edward," Rose said during a secret meeting at the office, "I'm sure they will show up at the party. Maria has always loved being the center of attention, and Robert, he will want to show off as the new partner." "Perfect," Edward replied, studying the floor plans of the event hall on the building's terrace. "Rose, I need you to coordinate the placement of the recording equipment during the party preparations. You're the only one who can do this without raising suspicion." The past few months had turned Rose Johnson into a domestic espionage expert. Using her connections with electronic equipment suppliers through her nephew Charles, she had obtained miniaturized recording devices that could be hidden in festive decorations without detection. "Aunt Rose," Charles said, examining the tiny transmitters, "these devices are professional grade. They can record audio and video in high definition and transmit everything in real time to our secure servers." "And you're sure they won't detect them?" Rose asked, always cautious. "Impossible, Aunt. They are disguised as decorative elements, artificial flowers, bunting, lights. Not even a counter-espionage expert would suspect," Charles assured confidently. The 47th floor terrace was transformed into a typical summer festival scene. Colorful booths, bunting fluttering in the night breeze, an artificial bonfire, rustic decorations that perfectly concealed the sophisticated espionage equipment. Rose worked for 3 full days, coordinating every detail of the decoration with the precision of a general planning a battle. "Rose," Edward said on the eve of the party, "are you sure all the strategic points are covered?" "Yes, Dr. Edward," she replied, showing a small map of the terrace. "Microphones at the main table, in the bar area, near the food booths, and disguised cameras covering all conversation areas. Anything they say will be recorded." Dr. Mark had coordinated with the FBI to have a specialized team monitoring the transmissions in real time from an improvised command center on the lower floor. The plan was to allow the criminals to completely incriminate themselves before making the arrests. "Edward," Dr. Mark said during a final planning meeting, "we have judicial authorization for all recordings. Anything we capture will be admissible as evidence. But you need to be very careful. If they suspect it's a trap, they might flee or, worse, try to do something violent." The party began at 7 p.m. on a chilly Friday in June. The terrace was filled with employees, partners and guests, all dressed in traditional summer festival attire. Edward wore a plaid shirt and a straw hat, maintaining a facade of normalcy while his heart raced with the tension of the operation. Maria arrived at 8:30 p.m., just as Rose had predicted. She wore an elaborate summer dress that highlighted her 5-month baby bump and was accompanied by Robert, who clearly felt comfortable in the role of new partner both personally and professionally. "Edward," Maria greeted him with fake kisses on the cheek. "What a wonderful party. You always know how to organize unforgettable events." Edward smiled, fighting the urge to reveal that he knew exactly who she really was. "Maria, you look radiant. Pregnancy is doing you a lot of good." Robert approached with an arrogant smile, extending his hand to Edward as if they were old friends. "Edward, we need to talk about the new company arrangements. Now that Maria and I are officially together, some changes will be necessary." "Of course, Robert. How about we talk over there at the main table? We can discuss all the details," Edward suggested, leading them exactly to where Rose had positioned the most sophisticated recording equipment. Meanwhile, Rose discreetly circulated through the party, serving drinks and snacks, but in reality monitoring every important conversation. She had trained her memory to capture details that could be crucial, and her decades of experience being invisible allowed her to position herself close to the conversations. Conversations without drawing attention. The first significant incrimination came when Maria and Robert stepped aside for a private conversation near the artificial bonfire. They were unaware that Rose had hidden one of the most powerful transmitters within the decorative structure of the fake flames. "Robert," Maria said, lowering her voice, "the Russians are getting impatient. They want the complete source code of Tech Agro by the end of the month, or they will cancel the final payment." "Maria, relax," Robert replied, taking a sip of beer. "Edward will be forced to deliver everything when the IRS freezes the company's accounts next week. The fake documents we provided are perfect." Rose felt a chill upon hearing the confirmation that they had fabricated the tax evidence. Through her microscopic earpiece, she heard Dr. Mark whisper, "Perfect. Rose, keep watching." The second confirmation came when two men whom Rose recognized as the foreigners described by Claire approached Maria and Robert. They spoke English with a heavy Slavic accent, confirming the international connection of the operation. "Mrs. Johnson," said the taller man, blonde with the scar on his chin that Claire had described, "our employers are satisfied with the progress. When Mr. Johnson delivers the technology, you will receive the final payment of €5 million. "And what about the problem with the daughter in London?" Robert asked. "It is being resolved," the man replied coldly. "She will no longer be an obstacle to the plans." Edward, who was close enough to hear through his own device, felt a murderous rage grow inside him. They had not only stolen his company and destroyed his life, now they were directly threatening his daughter Emily. Dr. Mark whispered in the earpiece, "Edward, stay calm. We have enough evidence to destroy them completely. Don't ruin everything now." The third and most devastating confirmation came when Henry Johnson arrived at the party, clearly reluctant but forced to attend. Maria pulled him into a secluded corner, unaware that Rose had positioned cameras at every possible angle. "Henry," Maria said threateningly, "I hope you're not thinking of doing anything stupid. Remember what will happen to your grandson if you don't cooperate." "Maria, please," Henry pleaded, his voice trembling. "I did everything you asked. I forged the documents, lied to Edward, destroyed my own reputation. What more do you want? We want you to sign the property transfer documents for the company to Robert on Monday. And we want you to testify that Edward tried to bribe you to hide the tax crimes," Maria ordered coldly. Henry bowed his head in defeat. "And if I do this, will you leave my family alone?" "If you do this, maybe," Maria replied cruelly. "But if you try to betray us, well, your grandson is a very beautiful child. It would be a shame if something happened to him." Rose had to control herself not to react upon hearing the threats against an innocent child. Through the earpiece, she heard Dr. Mark say, "That's enough. We have everything we need." At 11 p.m., when the party was at its peak and all the criminals were present and relaxed from alcohol and the feeling of imminent victory, Dr. Mark gave the signal. Federal agents who had discreetly infiltrated as waiters and security began to position themselves strategically. Edward approached the small stage where company speeches were usually made. "Everyone, may I have your attention for a moment?" The crowd turned to him, including Maria, Robert, and the foreigners, all smiling, believing that Edward was about to announce his surrender or his exit from the company. "I want to thank everyone for being here at this special party," Edward began, his voice laden with a satisfaction that only Rose and Dr. Mark could interpret correctly. "Tonight will truly be unforgettable." At that moment, the terrace lights fully illuminated, the federal agents identified themselves, and the trap that had been set for months finally closed in on the criminals who had tried to destroy Edward Johnson. The summer festival had transformed into a festival of justice. The silence that followed Edward's announcement was broken by the metallic sound of handcuffs being opened and the heavy footsteps of federal agents strategically positioning themselves on the terrace. The festive lights that moments before created a warm atmosphere of summer festival now harshly illuminated the pale faces of the criminals who realized too late that they had fallen into a perfect trap. "Maria Johnson, Robert Smith, you are under arrest for conspiracy, fraud, forgery, and industrial espionage," announced Federal Agent Raoul Anderson, a seasoned 50-year-old man who had coordinated the operation with Dr. Mark over the past weeks. Maria dropped the juice glass she was holding, the glass shattering on the wooden terrace floor with a sound that echoed in the tense silence. Her expression quickly shifted from confusion to despair as she comprehended the magnitude of the situation. "Edward, what's happening?" she screamed, her hysterical voice cutting through the cold night air of New York. "This is a mistake." "I'm your wife." "Ex-wife," Edward coldly corrected, stepping down from the stage with calculated strides. "And not just an ex-wife, but a convicted criminal. We have recordings of every word you said tonight, Maria. Every threat, every confession, every detail of the conspiracy." Robert tried to run for the exit, but was quickly intercepted by 2 federal agents. His summer festival plaid shirt was soaked with cold sweat as he was pushed against the wall, his hands being handcuffed behind his back. "Edward, you don't understand," Robert shouted desperately. "They threatened my family too. I had no choice." "You had a choice for 15 years, Robert," Edward replied, approaching the man who had been his best friend. "Every time you chose to lie to me, every time you chose to sabotage our company, every time you chose to sleep with my wife. Those were your choices." The 2 foreigners attempted a different approach. The tall blonde man drew a cell phone, trying to make an urgent call, probably to his superiors at Atlantic International Consulting. But Charles, who had strategically positioned himself near the building's communication system, had already blocked all cell signals on the floor. "You won't be able to warn anyone," said Charles, emerging from the shadows with a satisfied smile. "All communication systems are under our control." Rose watched the scene unfold with a mix of satisfaction and sadness. For months, she had seen Edward suffer from betrayals, questioning his ability to trust people. Now finally, justice was being served, but she knew the emotional scars would take a long time to heal. "Agent Anderson," said Dr. Mark, approaching the group of detainees, "we have enough evidence for criminal charges that could result in decades of prison for everyone involved. The recordings from tonight are just the icing on the cake." Maria made a last desperate attempt. "Edward, I'm pregnant. You can't do this to me. And to the baby!" "Robert's baby," Edward replied emotionlessly. "And you should have thought about the baby before getting involved with international criminals who threaten innocent children." It was at that moment that Henry Johnson approached, his legs visibly trembling. Throughout the party, he had remained silent, knowing this moment would come. Now, with tears streaming down his face, he addressed Edward. "Edward, my son," Henry said with a broken voice, "I know I don't deserve forgiveness, but you need to know. I documented everything. Every crime, every threat, every money transfer. It's all in the bank vault, as Rose already knows." Edward looked at the man who had been like a father to him for decades. The anger was still there, but mixed with a deep sadness at seeing a respected man reduced to that state. "Henry, you're going to be arrested too," Edward said gently, "but your cooperation will be taken into account, and I will personally ensure your grandchild is safe." As federal agents led the detainees to the elevators, a disturbing discovery emerged from the preliminary interrogations. The man with the scar on his chin, identified as Dimitri Walker, an industrial espionage agent with a history of police encounters in various countries, revealed that the operation against Edward was just a small part of a much larger scheme. Atlantic International is not just a consulting firm, Volkov revealed during the initial interrogation in the building itself. It's a front for economic espionage operations coordinated by former intelligence agents from various Eastern European countries. "How many other American companies are being targeted?" asked Agent Anderson. "At least 20 tech companies in New York, Los Angeles, and Chicago," Volkov replied, hoping that cooperation could reduce his sentence. "The goal is to steal American technology and sell it to Chinese and Russian corporations." The revelation that Edward had been the target of a nationwide economic espionage operation made the case take on much larger proportions. The Federal Prosecutor's Office and the CIA immediately got involved, turning what had started as a complicated divorce case into a matter of national security. Rose, who had involuntarily become a national heroine for her role in exposing the operation, was called to give her detailed testimony. Sitting in the FBI conference room, she meticulously recounted every observation, every intercepted conversation, every suspicious movement she had noticed during months of discreet surveillance. "Mrs. Johnson," said Agent Anderson with genuine admiration, "your dedication and intelligence have saved not only Mr. Edwards' company, but potentially dozens of other American companies. You are a true patriot." "I just did what was right," Rose replied modestly. "Dr. Edward always treated me with dignity. It was my duty to protect him." Meanwhile, Charles was being questioned about the technical aspects of the operation. His computer engineering skills and ability to trace the espionage systems had provided crucial evidence on how the criminals operated. "Charles," said a cybercrime specialist from the FBI, "were you able to map out the entire computer network they were using?" "Yes, sir," Charles replied with evident pride. "I identified at least 15 companies in New York that had been infected with the same viruses they tried to use on Uncle Edward's company. I have all the information here. The cleanup operation that followed the arrests revealed the true scale of the conspiracy. Corrupt employees at various companies, bribed attorneys, coerced accountants, and even some private security agents who had been infiltrated by Atlantic International were identified and arrested. Maria, during her interrogation the following morning, tried to downplay her role in the operation. "I was manipulated," she insisted, sitting in a cold room at the FBI, still wearing remnants of her summer festival costume. "They promised me no one would be harmed." "Mrs. Maria," said Federal Agent Ana Paula Ribeiro, "we have recordings of you threatening an 8-year-old child. We have evidence that you personally coordinated several sabotage operations. You were not manipulated. You were one of the leaders of the operation." Robert, for his part, tried a different approach. "I can provide information about other operations," he desperately offered. "I know of companies in other states that are being attacked in the same way." "Mr. Smith," replied Agent Anderson, "your cooperation may be considered in the sentencing, but that does not change the fact that you betrayed a 15-year friend and conspired against American companies." As the interrogations continued, Edward finally had a moment to process everything that had happened. Sitting in his office, now free from the threats that had loomed over him for months, he looked out the window at the city of New York, reflecting on how his life had changed completely. Rose quietly entered the office, carrying a cup of coffee the way he liked it, strong, without sugar, with a small amount of milk. It was a simple ritual. "Dr. Edward," she gently said, "how are you feeling?" Edward smiled, the first genuine smile he had given in months. "Rose, I'm fine. For the first time in a long time, I'm really okay." At that moment, both knew they had gone through something that had changed them forever. They were no longer just boss and employee. They were allies who had faced a storm together and emerged stronger on the other side. The first rays of July sun streamed through the windows of the 47th floor, illuminating an office that finally breathed peace after months of tension. Edward Johnson was sitting at his desk, no longer surrounded by legal defense documents or conspiracy evidence, but by contracts for new projects and expansion plans that had been put on hold during the crisis. "Dr. Edward," Mark Oliver said, entering the office with a radiant expression that hadn't been seen in months. "Petrotech called this morning. They want to resume negotiations for TechAg, and they're offering even better terms than the originals." Edward smiled, but his joy was tempered by reflection. "Mark, it's good to know our reputation is being restored, but I want you to understand one thing. We will never prioritize profits alone again. This company will have new values." The transformation in the company had begun the day after the arrests. Edward had called a general meeting with all employees, where he detailed what had happened and apologized for any instability they might have felt during the crisis. "Everyone," Edward had said at that memorable meeting, "I've learned that trust is not something given automatically because of position or relationship. Trust is built through consistent actions over time. And some of the people I trusted the most betrayed me, while others, whom I barely knew, proved loyal until the end. Rose was present at that meeting, no longer an invisible cleaning lady, but someone whom everyone in the company now knew and respected. Edward had officially announced her promotion to Corporate Security Director, a position created specifically for her. Rose Johnson, Edward had said to the audience of 200 employees, saved this company. Her vigilance, courage, and unwavering loyalty protected us from an international conspiracy. From today, she will be responsible for ensuring that nothing like this happens again. Rose, initially embarrassed by all the attention, had found her voice. Thank you. Dr. Edward, I promise I will use everything I've learned to protect not only this company, but all the families that depend on it. In the following months, Rose implemented a revolutionary security system based on the idea that invisible employees, cleaning staff, security, maintenance were actually the most effective eyes and ears of the company. She created a discreet communication network where any suspicious activity could be reported without fear of retaliation. Aunt Rose, said Charles, who had been officially hired as a cybersecurity specialist, I managed to track 3 more companies in New York that were being attacked by the same criminal network. With the information we obtained, the FBI was able to protect them before they were harmed. Rose's office on the 45th floor had become a nerve center of corporate intelligence. The walls were decorated with maps of New York, marking technology companies, photos of known suspects, and a complex web of contacts that stretched across the city through her network of domestic workers. Charles, Rose replied, organizing security reports on her new desk. I want you to keep monitoring communications. We discovered one network, but there may be others. Edward's personal transformation had been equally dramatic. The paranoid and distrustful man who had emerged during the crisis was gradually being replaced by someone who had learned to discern between healthy skepticism and destructive paranoia. Rose, Edward said during one of their weekly conversations in her office, you taught me something fundamental. True loyalty doesn't come from contracts or high salaries. It comes from treating people with dignity and respecting their humanity. Dr. Edward, Rose replied, adjusting a photo of her family on her new desk. You always treated me well, even when I was just the cleaning lady. You saw people, not just their roles. The legal situation of the criminals had evolved rapidly. Maria was sentenced to 12 years in prison for conspiracy and industrial espionage. Her pregnancy resulted in house arrest until the baby was born, but she completely lost any claim to Edward's assets when the marriage was officially annulled due to the discovery of document forgery. Robert received a 15-year sentence, but managed to reduce it to 10 years in exchange for his full cooperation with authorities. During interrogations, he provided information that led to the dismantling of similar operations in Washington, D.C. and Los Angeles. Robert had said during a visit Edward made to the federal prison in Washington, D.C., I know I don't deserve forgiveness, but I need you to know I truly thought I was doing the right thing. Maria convinced me that you were becoming unstable, that the company was in danger. Robert, Edward had replied, looking through the glass of the visiting room, what hurts me the most isn't what you did to me, but what you did to yourself. You destroyed 15 years of friendship for a woman who was using you from the start. Henry Johnson received the most lenient treatment due to his full cooperation and evidence that he had been coerced through threats to his family. Sentenced to 2 years in a halfway house, he lost his license to practice law, but Edward secretly arranged financial support for his retirement. Dr. Henry, Edward had said during a visit to the retired attorney, you made serious mistakes, but I understand what it's like to have your family threatened. I hope you can find peace. The case had become a landmark in the fight against industrial espionage in the United States. The Department of Justice created a special task force to investigate and prevent similar operations, and Rose was invited to be a consultant, sharing her observation techniques with federal agents. "Mrs. Johnson," said the Attorney General during a ceremony in Washington, D.C., "you have demonstrated that national security does not depend solely on sophisticated technology, but also on vigilant and courageous citizens." Emily, Edward's daughter, returned from London at the end of July. At 17, she had matured quickly during the months of crisis, understanding for the first time the complexities of the adult world and the risks that came with business success. "Dad," Emily said during a family dinner, "I now understand why you were always so careful, so suspicious at times. You were trying to protect us." "Emily," Edward replied, holding his daughter's hand, "I learned that balance is key. We need to be careful without becoming paranoid. We need to trust without being naive." The company not only survived the crisis but thrived. The TechAgro software, now free from theft threats, was licensed to governments in 12 African countries, promising to revolutionize agriculture in regions suffering from food insecurity. "Dr. Edward," Rose said during a board meeting where she now had a permanent seat, "I received a report that our technology helped increase corn production in Senegal by 40% this year." "Rose," Edward replied with genuine pride, "that means thousands of families will have enough food this year. That's what our work is about, not just profits, but making a difference in people's lives." Peter, Rose's eldest son, had graduated in electronic engineering and was hired by the company as a junior engineer. Mary was studying journalism at NYU with a full scholarship provided by the company, and Joseph, the youngest son, had become a minor celebrity at school for having a mother who caught international criminals. "Mom," Peter said during a family dinner in the renovated apartment that Rose had bought in Upper East Side with her new salary, "you completely changed our lives. We will never forget what you did." "Honey," Rose replied, looking at her 3 children around the dinner table, "I just did what was right, and I learned that when we do what is right, good things happen for everyone." The transformation in the network of domestic workers that Rose had mobilized also had lasting consequences. Claire was promoted to cleaning supervisor in her building. Laura started a small domestic security consulting business, and dozens of other women discovered that their observation skills had real economic value. "Rose," Claire said during a monthly group meeting, "you showed us that we are not invisible. We are powerful." The last major development came when the Atlantic International Consulting was completely dismantled through a coordinated operation among police from 8 countries. Dimitri Walker and his superiors were extradited to face trials in multiple jurisdictions, and millions of euros in criminal assets were seized. "Dr. Edward," said Federal Agent Raoul Anderson during a courtesy visit, "the case that started here in New York resulted in the dismantling of one of the largest industrial espionage networks in history. Mrs. Rose deserves international recognition." Edward looked out the window of his office at New York, stretching to the horizon, a complex and vibrant metropolis where millions of people struggled daily to build better lives. He had learned that his responsibility was not just to generate profits, but to contribute to the well-being of that entire community. "Rose," he said, turning to his security director and friend, "ready for the next challenge?" Rose smiled, adjusting the professional blazer she now wore instead of a cleaning uniform. "Always ready, Dr. Edward, always ready." A year after the summer festival that changed their lives forever, Edward Johnson and Rose Johnson found themselves on the terrace of the 47th floor, now transformed into a sustainable corporate garden. The space that had once been the scene of an elaborate trap had become a symbol of renewal and growth, with native plants growing in harmony with solar panels and rainwater harvesting systems. "Rose," Edward said, contemplating the panoramic view of New York at sunset, "can you believe everything that has happened since that day you warned me about the Russian security agents?" Rose, now wearing an elegant navy suit that reflected her new position as corporate security director, smiled thoughtfully. "Dr. Edward, my grandmother used to say that life is like weaving a poncho. You never know how the colors will come together until you see the final result." The company had not only survived the international conspiracy, but had become a model of corporate governance and social responsibility in the United States. The tech agro software was being used in 32 countries, contributing to global food security, while the company maintained its values of integrity and dignified treatment of all employees. "Dr. Edward," said Mark Oliver, approaching the two with a folder full of new contracts, "the World Bank delegation arrived this morning. They want to license our technology for a hunger eradication project in South Sudan." Edward nodded, but his expression showed that he had learned to balance business ambition with social responsibility. "Mark, before we close any deal, I want our ethics team to review all the terms. We need to ensure that our technology truly benefits the people who need it most, not just the intermediaries." Charles Johnson, now known as one of the most respected cybersecurity experts in the country, had created a protection protocol that was being adopted by companies across Latin America. At 23, he represented a new generation of Brazilian professionals combined technical excellence with social awareness. "Uncle Edward," said Charles, stepping onto the terrace with his laptop, "I received an invitation to speak at the cybersecurity conference at MIT. They want me to present the participatory security model we developed here." "Charles," Rose said with maternal pride, "you will represent not only our company, but show the world that Brazil produces top-notch innovation." The transformation in Edward's personal life had been equally dramatic. At 53, he had learned to value authentic relationships over convenience connections. His daughter Emily, now 18 and studying international relations at NYU, had become a determined young woman, intent on using her privileged position to create positive social impact. "Dad," Emily said, joining the group on the terrace, "I just came from the mentoring project meeting we're developing with Mrs. Rose. We're going to create a program to teach observation and security skills to working women in vulnerable situations." "Emily," Edward replied, embracing his daughter, "I am proud to see you using your opportunities to help others. That is what truly matters in life." Rose had become not only a respected executive, but a nationally recognized public figure for her role in dismantling the industrial espionage network. Her book, Invisible but Vigilant: How a Cleaning Lady Saved a Company, had become a bestseller, with all royalties donated to education programs for immigrant children. "Rose," said Dr. Mark Anderson, arriving at the terrace for a social meeting, "I received a call from the Department of Defense. They want you to develop a training program for intelligence agents based on your domestic observation techniques." "Dr. Mark," Rose replied, "I accept, but with one condition. I want part of the program to be dedicated to teaching agents to value information that comes from people in humble positions. Sometimes those at the bottom see things that those at the top cannot." The company's headquarters had become a model of social inclusion. The Community Eyes program, developed by Rose, employed immigrant and low-income women as preventive security specialists, transforming their natural observation skills into valued professional careers. "Claire," Rose said during a weekly meeting with her community security team, "how is the monitoring working in the financial district?" "Rose," replied Claire, now wearing a professional company uniform, "we identified 3 attempts at industrial infiltration this month. The target companies were alerted and took preventive measures." Peter Johnson had become a full engineer at the company and was leading the development of a new version of tech agro specific to small family farmers in the United States. Mary had graduated in journalism and worked as an investigative reporter specializing in corporate crimes. Joseph, now 15, dreamed of following in his mother's and older brother's footsteps. "Mom," said Peter during a family lunch at Rose's new apartment on the Upper East Side, "we got the Family Tech Agro project approved. We're going to distribute it for free to farmer cooperatives in the Northeast." "Honey," Rose replied, serving her favorite dish of feijoada, "your father would be proud to see you using engineering to help the poor of the land." The fate of the criminals had taken diverse but equally instructive paths. Maria had given birth to a girl in prison, and the child was being raised by Robert's mother with psychological and social support. Robert, serving his sentence in a halfway house, had enrolled in a prison psychology course and worked as a counselor for other inmates. "Edward," Robert had written in a letter that arrived at the office, "I know I can never undo the harm I caused, but I'm trying to use my time here to prevent others from making the same mistakes. Thank you for ensuring my daughter has a chance at a better life." Henry Johnson had definitively retired from law, but found a new vocation teaching legal ethics at a community college. His 8 grandchildren, including the boy who had been threatened by the criminals, were growing up knowing that their grandfather had made serious mistakes but had found a way to contribute positively to society. "Dr. Edward," Henry had said during a casual meeting at a bookstore downtown, "thank you for giving me the chance to rebuild my dignity. Sometimes redemption comes through humility and serving others. The International Industrial Espionage Network dismantled through the case had resulted in significant reforms in corporate security laws in multiple countries. The Brazilian model of participatory security, developed by Rose, was being studied and adapted by companies and governments around the world. "Rose," said a representative from the United Nations during a video conference, "your model is being experimentally implemented in technology companies in Kenya and Colombia. The preliminary results are extraordinary." As the sun set over New York, painting the sky with shades of orange and pink, Edward and Rose stood on the terrace, reflecting on the journey that had brought them here. The building that had once been a stage for betrayal and conspiracy had become a symbol of renewal and hope. "Rose," Edward said, watching the city lights begin to twinkle, "do you know what impresses me most about this whole story?" "What, Dr. Edward?" "How a matter of loyalty between 2 people transformed into something that benefited thousands of others. Your courage not only saved my company, it inspired a movement to value the people our society often overlooks." Rose smiled, thinking of her journey from an immigrant cleaning lady to an internationally respected executive. "Dr. Edward, my grandmother always said that God places special people in our path not by accident, but by purpose. I think our purpose was to show that dignity, respect, and loyalty are more powerful than money or status." Charles approached the two, carrying a bottle of champagne. "Uncle Edward, Aunt Rose, I just received confirmation the company was chosen as Company of the Year by Fortune magazine in the category of social innovation." Emily rushed to join the celebration, followed by Peter, Mary, and Joseph. Dr. Mark and other key employees of the company began to gather on the terrace for an impromptu toast. "Everyone," said Edward, raising his glass, "this award is not mine. It's not the company's. It belongs to all of us, to every person who chose to do what is right, even when it was difficult, to every employee who remained loyal during the crisis, to every family member who supported our struggle." "Dr. Edward," Rose said, raising her own glass, "I want to make a special toast to the strength of ordinary people who do extraordinary things when guided by love, justice, and hope." As the glasses clinked under the stars that began to appear in the New York sky, everyone present knew they had participated in something much greater than a simple business success story. They had taken part in a human transformation that proved that true wealth is not in what we possess, but in the quality of the relationships we build and the positive impact we have on the lives of others. The city of New York stretched infinitely in all directions, its millions of inhabitants going about their lives, building dreams, facing challenges. And on the 47th floor of a building on Fifth Avenue, an unlikely friendship between a businessman and a cleaning lady had transformed into an example that, when we treat all people with dignity and respect, extraordinary things can happen. Rose looked one last time at the view of the city before heading home, where a simple dinner awaited her with her children. Edward stayed a few more minutes, contemplating not only the financial success he had preserved, but mainly the lessons of humanity he had learned. In the pocket of his jacket was a letter from a cooperative of farmers in Texas, thanking him for the TechAg software that had tripled their corn production. It was reminders like this that made all the suffering and struggle worthwhile. "Thank you, Rose," Edward murmured to the night breeze. "Thank you for reminding me of who I really am." And so, a story that had begun with the smell of disinfectant and suspicions of betrayal ended with the aroma of hope and the certainty that, when we choose integrity over convenience, when we value people over profits, and when we treat every human being with the dignity they deserve, we can not only survive the storms of life, but emerge from them as better and wiser people. The true victory had not been preserving a company or dismantling an international conspiracy. The true victory had been discovering that even in the darkest moments, there are always people willing to do what is right, and that this fundamental kindness of humanity is more powerful than any force that seeks to destroy it. Leave your like, subscribe to the channel, activate the bell, and if you watched until here, comment "I watched until here" and leave your opinion about this story, huh? And don't forget to watch the next video that appears on the final screen for you. It's very exciting.